Welcome to Forthright. I'm Sulani Madsen, and my guest today for conversation is Cindy Mitchell with the Washington Forest Protection Association. And I'm going to let Cindy introduce herself and her role with the WFPA.
Thank you, Sue. Washington Forest Protection Association is 115 years old this year, and it is a group of private forest landowners. And we started out as a forest fire association, and then we moved into, in the 50s, to the Forest Protection Association, protecting the equity investments of private forest land. My name is Cindy Mitchell, and I'm the Senior Director of Public Affairs for the association.
Okay, and I'm happy to have this conversation because I think we share some interests in how the natural world does a good job of sequestering carbon. My husband and he's very much into soil health and how much rangelands and grasslands sequester carbon, and you've got the other side, what the forest can do in terms of taking carbon out of the atmosphere. You have a new report out that I'd like you to highlight.
Yeah, we just put a new website up, and it's called Working Forests Carbon Blueprint. And we also have additional resources on our homepage, WFPA.org. And it's all about how actively managing our forests is going to bring us a better climate benefit. And many know that when forests are unhealthy or lands are unhealthy, they're more susceptible to drought, insects and disease, and wildfire. And when those forests are in that state, they're emitting carbon. So it's worth all of us to look at our forested landscapes, and that's what we're doing, and how to optimize health and resilience of those forested lands. And in our case, with the private forest landowners, we also harvest to produce wood products, which continues to store carbon.
One of the interesting things that I noted on the carbon blueprint was Washington is the #1 best place to grow trees, highest percentage of land that's highly productive, and that's a pretty interesting statistic right there. What percent of forest land is in our area is, or what percent of Washington is in forest land? I guess is what I wanted to say.
Yeah, and in the 22 million acres, which is half of the state, and that productive forest land is really on the West Coast, and it's probably from lower British Columbia to maybe Northern California. It's called the temperate forest, and many people often refer to rainforests that are part of that, but it has to do with how productive the soil is, how we have a temperate climate. So we don't have really hard winters, and we generally don't have really hot summers. And there's plenty of rain, as we all know. And so the soil produces a lot of volume on the trees. As trees grow, they absorb carbon. And when trees are in their older dying state, they start emitting carbon. And so we look at the landscape on how healthy the forests are and how resilient they are to continue absorbing carbon if we're looking through a carbon lens. There's many, many uses of forest that isn't just about carbon. It's about the decadence of those older forests and the natural cycle that over hundreds of years comes into balance. But from a forest products industry standpoint, we're going to look at our acres that we produce wood on and maintaining their optimal health so they can contribute to the climate, reducing climate in the atmosphere, which is really an important focus that we all have right now.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that to make a note that it's when trees are in their most vigorous growing stage, the adolescent stage, they're pulling the most carbon out of the atmosphere. And one of the pushes right now, as you hear the Arbor Day Association and others all the time talking about, well, we need to plant trees. We need to plant trees and we need to nurture them to grow. How does the Washington Forest Protection Association work with landowners to have successful tree planting?
Well, as forest landowners who are planting, growing, nurturing, and then harvesting, that's our business model. It's not only the state law that requires that you replant, which is great for those who don't replant, but we can't imagine anybody who's not replanting because it's part of an ongoing cycle. And I would say that there's probably plenty of land that does not have trees on it, and that would be called afforestation, where you would add trees to the landscapes. You're adding more trees than were already there. Just like any form of agriculture crop, there is a planting, there's a growing, and there's a harvesting. Forestry is a much longer cycle than
Mhm.
1 year.
And you have some new public polling out to see how well these messages have been received, and some of the findings about what Washington State voters think about managed forests. Were there some highlights of that polling that you'd like to mention?
There is, and that would be found on our homepage, WFPA.org. And one of the most fascinating things, we asked all voters what they thought about managed forest, but we described it. We didn't just say managed forest, what's that? We said managed forest, which are sustainably harvested for wood products and also for forest health and resilience by removing the underbrush and removing and thinning the trees so there aren't too many trees per acre. So when you describe a managed forest, 89% of the voters agree that that's important and they believe it. And so I think that is a really important piece of information, because sometimes reading headlines or listening to debates, that voice isn't brought forward. And we want to make sure we bring forward the voice of the voters and the people that are in the state, that actually it makes sense to have managed forests and manage agriculture and manage landscapes. Not everywhere, there are areas where people don't touch and they're left in their pristine natural state. And that can be pretty wild, where you have wildfires, floods, storms, and it's left to nature. And there's an important part of our state that has those kinds of trees. But when you're talking about forests that are going to produce lumber, it's really important to keep those forests healthy, else they will start emitting carbon as they decay or burn, rather than absorbing carbon as they grow.
The carbon blueprint, Working Forest Carbon Blueprint, has some really interesting graphics showing how different types of forest management change the amount of carbon sequestered. Taking a look at DNR, for instance, shows carbon sequestered at 4.43 tons per acre, annual metric tons. Forest Service 2.89. I mean, just much lower. And let me scroll up here to the large private landowners who are paying attention to the trees as a crop and trying to maximize. Certainly have a higher carbon sequestration than either, at 4.94 annual metric tons of carbon per acre, and a lower CO2 emitted, which is even even better. Yeah, overall, that's makes a pretty big difference. And so I think I live in an agricultural area. There's not trees; it's mostly wheat and canola, and so it's not as tall as a tree, but it's got an annual cycle. I think if people thought a little bit more about forests on that kind of, it's just a very long-term scale agricultural cycle. I know you and I both participated in the Washington Ag Forestry Foundation program, and that's one that brings together people from agriculture and forestry backgrounds, as well as from some of the agencies, and now some of the nonprofit, the NGOs that are involved. Is WFPA planning to do any outreach with ag forestry? Do you think you can get your association to participate a little bit more?
Certainly, we do sponsor the Government in Action seminar in January, February. And the person who hired me many, many years ago, Stu Bledsoe, founded the program. So we're deeply committed to it. And I think right now the program is going through a really neat metamorphosis and connecting their curriculum over the 2 years. And so I think it's a really great opportunity to reconnect with ag forestry, because they're bringing current policy issues, current issues we're all facing together, and all those different, when I spoke to them this year, there was the state veterinarian, state agencies, like you said, agriculture, forestry, banking, insurance, and there's a variety of people that are coming together. And that is one of the only places that much diversity comes together to talk about our natural resources. So it was very memorable program for me, and we definitely support it. Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to get that in there just because I think more people should know about that. That's been going
I
on
do too.
for over 30 years, and it's a part of the natural
Yes.
resource base of information in this state in ways that people just don't even recognize. Sharing of
Yes.
information and sharing of goals and resources. So
Mhm.
I think you're the Working Forests Carbon Blueprint.org. That website has got a lot of really great information for people if they're looking to see the comparison.
Yeah.
Some great graphics that really make some of the information clear. One of the risks on here, land conversion, is one that
Yes.
we see
Yes.
in ag areas as well. I mean, we're seeing it here with we're seeing it in my county, in Lincoln County, with land that's broken up after several generations from the original ownership, and so now it may be subject to subdivision. I know the same thing. The pressures are even greater on the west side where the temperate forests are. What are some things that WFPA has been doing to help mitigate that?
Well, I think there's some misnomers about what motivates landowners. I mean, of course, it's a business, so their ability to make a financial return is important. But WFPA represents just half of the private forest land, and the other half are small forest landowners. And those are family farms, and it's difficult to transfer from one generation to the next if the next generation doesn't see the value, or really we talk about the social license. If the public doesn't understand working forests or farms for that matter, then it's distasteful for the next generation to take it on. And so oftentimes I like to talk about how the public license to operate, social license, the acceptance of the practices can often be a very important motivator to stay in forestry. And of the landscape, the 8 million acres of private land in the state, which is just about 36% of all the forests, the small landowners are most likely to convert because they're closest to the urban areas. And it's not that large landowners don't convert, but it is being able to stay in business and having people understand and embrace and want to have wood, which society wants wood now versus other more energy intensive building materials. It's all part of the climate solution. So sometimes we have a disconnect between the growers and the people who actually use the product. And that's a source of frustration for folks. So we help by trying to educate, as well as saying it's not all just about profit. I mean, profit's important, but if you can't stay in business to support yourself and to be wanted on the landscape, then it's hard to keep the farms going after generations,
Okay.
multiple generations.
Well, I think you've got a summary statement here that we could close on. The carbon blueprint for Washington's working forests. Washington's working forests are crucial to meeting the state's commitment to reduce net carbon emissions by 95% by 2050, because healthy growing trees are the fastest way to remove carbon from the atmosphere. Is that a fair closing statement for WFPA?
Yes, it's fair. And thank you so much for bringing this out to the public, because if we're all serious about climate change, we'll work with what we have. And what we have is great growing ground for timber, and protect the special places and grow heartily the wood that is for building. So thank you very much. It's a great closing statement.
Thanks.
Yeah.